Okay, so yeah, I thought I'll share with you my research by telling a story. So pictured here is my PhD advisor, Muriel Medard at MIT, and I was trained with her on analytics and developing new ways to statistically understand data for wireless communication applications. And before I went on to take a faculty position at the University of Illinois, she strongly encouraged me to go do a postdoc in something wildly different. And so I ended up doing a postdoc with this gentleman, Emory Brown, who's practicing anesthesiologist at Mass General Hospital. In addition, he's a professor of neuroscience at MIT, and his PhD is in statistics. And so I was able to learn sort of medicine through the lens of statistics, and in particular neurology. And so with that, when I came to University of Illinois, I wanted to work on a project that could be fun but would still have intellectual merit. And so what I thought about tinkering around with are applications that really play to my unique strengths, brain-computer interfaces, systems that elicit a direct communication pathway between the brain and an external device. And so what you see in these systems in this bottom diagram is you have a brain that you're recording from, and then you take this information and you do statistical analysis on it to help people make decisions. And so that's sort of postdoc work, PhD work. A typical example of this in a non-invasive setting is in this picture here. You see this gentleman that's wearing this shower cap-like device. In the shower cap-like device, you basically scrub the skin, apply conductive gel, and it's recording the electrical rhythms of the brain. Take that information and the physiological understanding, you can allow people to do basic things. For example, move a ball to the left or move a ball to the right on the screen. And so when we entered the field, we noticed that this was the essence of what people were doing. And so we're getting one bit out of the brain to move a ball to the left or to the right that seemed rather underwhelming. So we got interested in understanding how could you make things better, and what we came to realize, very much in line with the previous speaker spoke of, is that people were not making appropriate use of feedback. So even if we don't try to gather more than a bit out of the brain, perhaps we ask the question, how can I make best use of each of those individual bits of the brain to enable better applications? And so what we came to realize is that if this computer system can be very clever about the types of feedback that it provides, and to let your binary command respond to my feedback, we can perhaps do some fun things. Very analogous to 20 questions, where you have a number in your head between 1 and 20. I ask you the question, is a number less than 10 or greater than 10? That's a smart thing to do. Asking you, is a number less than 19 or greater than 19, is a dumb thing to do. So how do we do that now in a statistical sense, where the information that we're gathering is not exact, but I have a noisy response of what you're saying? How do I sort of take that information and make sure I ask you the right question? Is a number less than 10 or greater than 10? And so we did this now in an example where it's not a number between 1 and 20 in your head, but rather let's imagine it's a smooth path you want to specify in 2 dimensions for navigating a wheelchair or something like that. And so the key insight that what we did is we engineered the feedback very carefully, and you just give me a binary command, look at where this path differs from the path that I display. Counterclockwise means imagine right, counterclockwise means imagine left. And keep doing this, and lo and behold, with brain control, people can specify an exact path in 2 dimensions. So this was data from a real experiment with EEG. We then partnered with some aerospace engineers and went one step further to be provocative and asked the question, could we actually fly an airplane over the cornfields of Illinois by doing this whole path specification scenario? And it turns out that the answer is yes, and you can just briefly watch in this video. So this gentleman, just with brain control, doing imagine left, imagine right, is aligning those 2 paths, playing the 20 questions with noise game. And you can see that the plane is flying. Here's a GPS video of it, and it's actually flying along the path that he's specifying sequentially. So this is, so we got excited about that. We want to emphasize this is not to suggest people in the future will be flying airplanes with their brain, but rather it was to suggest that people can do things that perhaps we did not think could be done otherwise if you appropriately use feedback. And so this high-level idea of brainwave controllers caught the attention of the economists, thus validating the fun that I was having, and put your thinking cap on, pun intended. And that's great, but one thing that's not great about this is the picture. The text is great, but the picture is very clunky. And so we got very interested in beginning to realize that although we've done sort of great intersection of neurology and analytics with these feedback-based systems to make some clever paintings with these 2 paintbrushes, perhaps what we need to do in addition is innovate with the sensor paintbrush. And if we wed these three paintbrushes together, perhaps we can make even better paintings. And so the high-level vision of our research group that we're trying to do is to enable this picture right here, to develop unobtrusive wearable sensors that don't get in the way of you doing your daily lives, developing sophisticated analytics, real-time algorithms, and then making this intersect with medicine in meaningful ways for which we take this information, succinctly describe it to a doctor so that they can allow you to make decisions. So if I start with this picture here on the left, we can begin to ask ourselves, why is it that we saw that picture that was in The Economist? And it turns out the reason is because biology, as we all know, is soft, curvilinear, and elastic, whereas electronic circuits rest upon semiconductor wafers, which are rigid, planar, and brittle. So it's like Democrats and Republicans in the U.S. Cannot draw a starker contrast. So what we came to realize, though, is that it turns out that you can bridge this gap. You can be a centrist. And the insight is that if we take a look at the electronic circuits that are in our iPhone and a variety of other electronics, they're all resting on these rigid semiconductor wafers, these silicon wafers. And the analogy I like to give is that these silicon wafers are a lot like when you do cooking. You have your frying pan or your skillet. And you put the food into the skillet, and the skillet can withstand high temperatures. It can mix everything together. Ultimately, you take the food out of the skillet. Remarkably, what we do with our iPhone and everything else is that the skillet basically is still there, in the sense that the silicon wafer, most of that serves no functional purpose besides just withstanding high temperatures and chemicals during fabrication. Only the top thin layer actually has the functional circuits. So could we develop a way to take the food out of the skillet, perhaps using some non-spray stick? And it turns out that you can do that. You can use the standard semiconductor manufacturing and peel off a thin layer of all the functional circuits and mount it onto something that's organic and naturally bendable. And so we partnered with John Rogers, a material scientist at Illinois, to do this and really try to optimize this specifically for integrating things onto the skin. And so this was a long-standing project. It took us about 3 years. And in 2011, we demonstrated the system that we call epidermal electronics. So these are flexible electronic circuits that are also stretchable, so they can compress with the skin and they can stretch with the skin. And again, for the purpose of being provocative, we can do fun things like use temporary tattoos as the mechanism to apply them to the skin. So you take the backside of a temporary tattoo, transfer the electronic circuits to it, then mount the temporary tattoo on the skin, and so the circuits are invisible and it can still withstand mechanical deformations. So here's a picture just demonstrating a variety of things that you can do with these systems. You can put antennas on these for wireless transmission. You can deliver power to them wirelessly, the way that the Android phones work with NFC. You can have LEDs and light sensors, and with those two things in conjunction and appropriate signal processing, you can do things like pulse oximetry to monitor blood oxygenation. You can monitor temperature and strain, and then bread and butter electrophysiology. And so here's just a picture of the outer layer of the skin. You have your biologically inert elastomer, and then sandwiched in between are the electronics. And if it's an electrical sensor, you have the gold touching the skin. We demonstrated that you can record a variety of signals, and so here's an EKG we're pretty proud of. Our student Merdu, her dad's a cardiologist, so she knew exactly where to put the sensors. It's a good EKG. In addition, skin temperature, along with the electrical rhythms of the brain, the EEG, where here you can see that there's a 10 hertz band pertaining to when your eyes are closed. So that's the good news. I'd be lying to you if I told you that everything was good. So there's the good, the bad, and the ugly, and a couple of challenges that we see, one of which is that we really want to validate our sensors and make sure that the physiological signals that we're picking up are commensurate with what you would pick up with conventional clunky technology. In some situations we get there, but this is always a process where we're trying to improve. In addition, although we can miniaturize electronics, one thing that's very challenging to miniaturize is the energy source. And so we're very interested in ways to, novel ways to get energy, as well as novel ways to signal this with low power. Some of you might be imagining, if you have something that can be embedded in a temporary tattoo and you don't even realize you're wearing it, what could the implications be for privacy or security? And so we're very aware of this and trying to identify ways for which we can make sure that this data does not get in the wrong hands. Something else that you might have noticed in that blow-up picture that I showed was that there's squiggly wires everywhere. It's kind of like the box springs in your bed. to withstand mechanical deformations. So now in this process that we want to build flexible electronics, we're really wetting mechanics with electrical engineering, it does create new problems. One of which is that if you take an antenna and now you stretch it, you're going to change the inductance, which as a subsequence can change the resonant frequency, as shown in the supplemental materials of one of our papers. So what we got interested in doing is developing new ways and using principles of fractals and self-similar mathematical concepts that can withstand the mechanical deformations that are more robust from an electrical transmission perspective. So seen here, you can stretch by about 30% with only mildly changing the resonant frequency of the antenna. And secondly, we've been interested in novel ways to signal this information, really exploiting the fact that most of these physiological signals are very, very low frequency. And so it turns out that you can use pulse-based systems that are much lower energy as compared to Bluetooth, which just draws a ton of current out of your system. And so we've demonstrated this as seen with the original EKG as well as the wirelessly transmitted. So pivoting forward now, I've begun to explain to you what we're doing with these sensors. We now can start to ask ourselves, well, the data that we get out of this, we need to analyze this data and make good sense out of it for clinical relevance. So one of the things that we've been doing, which stems from my postdoc with Emory Brown, is noticing that even with one physiological modality, you can actually estimate other modalities. And so for example, imagine I take an EKG, and in particular, just take the timings of the RR peaks of the EKG. Well, it's well known that when you inhale and you exhale, there are subtle changes in the RR peaks and the timing of the RR peaks. And so you can develop state space estimation algorithms analogous to the things that the previous speaker spoke about. And what you see right here is a picture where we have the blue represents our estimate of your respiration rate. And we did a validation study where we had someone wear one of these bioharness devices, which basically is monitoring your respiration the traditional way with strain. And lo and behold, the blue and the red overlap with each other well. So moving forward, what that's going to mean with these types of wearable sensors I'm talking about, or any of the other ones that people are developing, we are going to reach a point where we're going to have all of these physiological signals that are being recorded from people's bodies. And although that's great, the question is, what are we going to do with this? And how can we succinctly describe what's happening in a clinically relevant scenario? And one of the things that we began to realize right away is that typical correlation-based statistical measures are just going to, are going to be too complex and perhaps more importantly, are not going to be able to succinctly describe what's happening to a clinician. So we very much got interested in developing procedures that can not only understand correlation, but also understand questions of timing and how the past of some processes affect the future of others. So the high-level idea is you take all of these time series, be it from the brain, the heart, core body temperature, et cetera, and you want to succinctly describe a picture of a directed graph or a directed edge demonstrates how the past of one process causally affects the future of another. Moreover, we were very interested in doing this in a general purpose manner so that this can not only be applied to bodily signals, but perhaps also we could leverage a lot of the infrastructure that's used in the cloud by people like Facebook and other areas. And so we've been able to develop approaches to do this that also have the nice aspect that how we estimate all these quantities can be done in a distributed manner. So this can really be scaled and be done in real time. And perhaps I can just convince you that with a simple video. And so what this video represents is a real-time algorithm that we've developed that can be implemented in the cloud with thousands of nodes passing messages. And in this video that you see, each one of these represents a different time series, a different physiological process, and we're estimating whether or not a directed edge should be applied, one or another, as we're acquiring this data in real time. So this is a sort of time-varying directed graph reflecting the causal relationships between these processes. And the underlying idea in this comes from the notion of Granger causality, which Clive Granger, a Nobel laureate from UCSD, developed within the context of economics. So moving forward now, what I've demonstrated is that these algorithms that we can develop to understand this physiology and succinctly describe it in a directed graph, now we can begin to understand what clinical applications we can do with this to really provide value. And I'll speak to two applications, so going through the circle of life, one of which at the beginning stages of life and another at the latter stages of life. And so within the context of the beginning of life, the picture that we see quite so often in medicine is trickle-down technology. And what I mean by that is that so much effort is spent on really optimizing technology and optimizing approaches to deal with adults and their clinical issues. And then little by little, this gets, the things that work for children, we use those, and the things that don't, we throw them out. And then the things that work in the pediatric setting, we move those down to the neonate, and the ones that don't work, we get rid of them. But the punchline is not much effort is directly spent at targeting arguably our most vulnerable clinical population. And so you'd be surprised if I told you this. And what you see on the slide, I do not mean, so babies are an underserved population, in particular newborns. And by that, I don't mean black babies or Hispanic babies or babies in a developing world. I mean all newborn babies. And so to make my point clearly, within the context of brain injury for adults, we have over 1,500 neuro ICU specialists in the U.S. alone, accredited specialty in many ways to monitor the brain function. If we focus on brain injury for newborn babies, there's only 30 such specialists in the world. That's amazing. And there are no dedicated training programs and only one continuous way to monitor brain function using that shower cap device that I mentioned before, the EEG. And so here's a picture of my collaborator at UCSD and Rady Children's Hospital, MJ Harbert, who is one of those 30. We're very fortunate to have one of them at UCSD. And it's great collaborating with clinicians because sometimes they say things that perhaps are obvious to them and not to engineers, or the other way around. And so one of these bombs that she detonated with her monotone voice that I really appreciate is that the physiology of the neonate is so different than that of any other human, be it an adult or even a 3-year-old. And so just one example of that is that if we stand back and we take a look at cognitive impairment for dementia or for Alzheimer's disease, turns out that the excitatory relationships between the brains are weakened, but the inhibitory ones are still very much in place. Well, for newborn babies, especially those that are born prematurely, the opposite occurs. So the inhibitory connections are not that strong, but the excitatory ones are. And so any engineer who knows anything about feedback, we know that if the inhibitory relationships are not there, that's going to create problems. And in particular, you won't be able to regulate brain function, and maybe out of control events will occur such as seizures. And indeed, that happens quite often. And so we're beginning to realize that within the context of newborn babies, seizures are occur much more often than we thought. Moreover, half of these seizures that occur are what's called subclinical, meaning that there's no overt behavioral response. So you need to be aggressively monitoring the brain so that you can deliver care. Secondly, if care is not delivered to these babies, it can lead to cerebral palsy, cognitive impairment, or even death. And so here's a picture of MJ treating one of these babies. And you can see that the baby has all these different sensors, the same that were like for the shower cap on the head. And the way that they monitor, the way they apply these is they first scrub the skin, apply conductive gel, and then monitor. And as we might imagine, I said this is a vulnerable population, newborn babies. A lot of them have very fragile skin. And that process of scrubbing the skin can lead to abscess and infection or even death. And unfortunately, MJ and her unit, they actually lost a baby in the process of trying to record brain waves to treat the newborn. And so if they had a way to unobtrusively monitor the brain, there are effective clinical ways to treat these seizures, one of which is with the appropriate drugs, another of which is with hypothermia, cooling the body down to slow down the inflammatory process. So to make a long story short, it took us a while, as you can imagine, but we ultimately got approval from the hospital to do a validation study where we're putting the conventional electrodes on the newborn baby's skin, while in addition we're applying our peel and stick epidermal sensors that don't require any scrubbing of the skin or conductive gel. And so here's a picture of a newborn baby that's having brain injury that MJ is treating, and where this white cloth is, that's where the conventional sensors are. Underneath there, and here are where our epidermal sensors are. The black represents the electrical rhythms of the brain as measured with the tattoos, and the red represents the control as measured with the conventional sensors. In addition, here's a picture of another baby. This is the most recent baby that we recorded from. This baby was a premature baby with very fragile skin. And as you see right here, here's a picture of the baby after we took off the conventional clunky electrodes, and some of that gluish gel is still there, as you can see. And then where this black arrow is, that's where our epidermal sensor is. And then after we took the epidermal sensor off, we just wanted to see what effect is there on the skin. And some of you might not be able to see this in the back, but if you look carefully, you can see that there's a lot of irritation and redness in certain areas where the conventional sensors were. And if you look where the epidermal sensors are, there's not as much. So this is very preliminary studies. We've only recorded from 5 babies, But this is what really gets us excited about our technology. And so just to emphasize, a glimpse of the picture we're trying to tell, sort of along these lines of having a newborn baby, where we can monitor not only what we do conventionally, the electrical rhythms of the heart as well as respiration, but in addition being able to monitor brain function, now in a manner where a parent can have skin-to-skin contact with their child, let alone a clinician can still monitor and intervene when appropriate. And so our vision for this theme is to develop a fetal perinatal neurology clinic. We have collaborations also within the context of pregnancy monitoring, expanding our team so we don't have only one neonatal neurologist, but more, and also doing outreach throughout the community, because as it turns out, the intervention that I mentioned, hypothermia, this has to be done within the first 6 hours of life. And so what happens in many cases is that one of these babies comes from another hospital where they were born to MJ, but if it was after 6 hours, she's unable to provide some of these clinical interventions. So some of this really involves community outreach and education to all the neighboring hospitals. And we're very excited about, we're gonna have 50 ICU beds at the new Jacobs Medical Center at UCSD. And this is going to be a $1 billion hospital, the largest hospital of its kind anywhere in Southern California. And what we're very excited about is that it's being bankrolled by Irwin Jacobs, the founder of Qualcomm, basically the godfather of wireless. So if you were to ask yourselves, what if Google were to build a hospital? We can start to ask those questions. And so we're very excited about that opportunity. Pivoting forward towards another use case, towards the latter stages of life, we have a partnership with Google, and we're looking at some chronic disease management issues. And so if you look at this picture, as you see right here, you see our epidermal sensor, which is an unobtrusive device worn onto the body that can monitor the electrical rhythms of your body. And then you see the Google Glass, which is an unobtrusive wearable device that can see the state of you and your environment and your contacts and can provide a decision support tool system. So we came up with a platform that we call Glucose Glass. And the idea is that imagine you have someone who is a diabetic who needs to monitor their glucose, take this information to identify what they ate in the past, to identify what they should eat again and when, and to do this in much more of an automated decision support tool manner so that people can get back to living their more normal lives. As any of us know who have friends who are diabetics, this is it's a big challenge where you have to remember all of these details and to identify when to deliver a bolus of insulin again, and a lot of this information our physiology can help us with. Moreover, the future glucose monitoring systems actually wirelessly transmit to smartphones. And so if we stand back and think about at the moment of digestion of food, that's when there's a lot of physiological variability that takes place. We can be using our epidermal sensors to monitor things like EKG and core body temperature and to really understand that dynamic physiological variability to allow people to better manage their disease. And so the high level idea is sort of this picture as we see it, where someone can use their Google Glass device and use cutting edge techniques that are being done in machine learning and computer vision, where you can basically take a picture of something and the computer science algorithm guys can identify that is a tomato, those are carrots, those are cucumbers, and so you can begin to get an estimate of the amount of calories, the number of carbohydrates that you're digesting, and this allows you to get back to living a more normal life, wedding that information along with your physiological variability to build a decision support tool to suggest to you again when to eat and what to eat again, and you can get back to leading normal lives, such as running marathons. And so we're partnering with Nate Heitzman and Steve Edelman, who are diabetes experts at UCSD, and a nonprofit foundation called Insulin Independence. And so this is a blow-up picture of what we're doing, and these are just two examples of many potential uses of this technology. And we realize that we cannot do this alone, and so we're partnering with many people. So MC10 is a startup company that was co-founded by my collaborator, John Rogers at Illinois, and some of my MIT grad student buddies. We're also partnering with Intel in terms of developing new ways to think about wireless transducers, as well as the back-end analytics and cloud storage. I mentioned Google Glass. We recently were able to get fortunate to get a grant from Amazon Web Services so that we can run our distributed algorithms on top of their cloud. And also, as I mentioned, the UC San Diego new Jacobs Medical Center opening in 2016, and Qualcomm has expressed quite a bit of interest, and so we're partnering with Qualcomm Life. In addition, we'd like to acknowledge our federal government partners, NSF, NIH, the Department of Defense, as well as the Gerber Foundation for the baby work and the Gates Foundation for some pregnancy work that we're doing. So to conclude, I guess what I'd like to say is that, I started off with this analytics paintbrush that I was able to develop my PhD work. Then with Emory Brown, I was able to work within the context of medicine and neurology, and to wet these two things together, and we realized that we needed to also innovate in terms of sensors. Now, we get a lot of press in terms of these sensors, and everyone is excited about the tattoos, but I'd like to caution everyone to remember that if you were to give some dull paintbrushes to Pablo Picasso, he would still paint a beautiful painting. And if you give the most sophisticated paintbrushes in the world to an amateur, they're probably going to make a dull painting. So although these sensors and all these things are really cute, it's our viewpoint that it's really how you integrate these together and really identify the unmet need in the application, and that's where the value proposition lies. And so lastly, I'd like to thank everyone in our research group. I never would have imagined in a million years. I started off as just a theory guy with pencil and paper, and now we have molecular and cellular biologists and bioengineers and mechanical engineers and EEs, and we actually build things, and so we're really excited. So this picture of our group represents not only the ethnic and the gender diversity, but in the sort of cultural diversity, but also the intellectual diversity, and it's a fertile playing ground. And one of our students is from Brazil, Mariane Catano. So with that, thank you.